Welcome back to the NIL Era Podcast. My name is Elise, Byun.
And I'm Fernando, Andrade. After having our past two guests on the podcast, being Sion James from Duke men's basketball and Liam Anderson from Stanford cross country and track, it is very apparent that there are defining brands and some that are leading more than others. Today, we specifically want to dive deeper into what this means for the future of college athletics. In Liam's episode, which was episode 16, if you haven't listened to that, highly recommend that you guys do listen to that because it's a phenomenal episode. Both Elise and I believe Liam is one of the most educated people in the space of college athletics, specifically for recent graduates. But Elise, something was mentioned there with Project Rudy, and I don't know really what that's about. So could you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, of course. So to echo Fernando there, if you haven't listened to that episode, I highly, highly recommend. We dive very much so deep into a lot of different nuances of college athletics, but we kind of did an overview of Project Rudy, and now we're going to dive a little more deeper. So what exactly is Project Rudy? Project Rudy is a proposed college football super league. So focused on forming a super league of 70 teams, this project is aiming to reshape the landscape of college football. This project is spearheaded by former Disney executives, and they really just want to consolidate top programs from the Power Four conferences of the SEC, Big Ten, Big 12, and the ACC into two 35-team divisions. We've talked about it before, about those non-conference games early in the season that don't get as many views as the big matchups. So this structure would eliminate matchups between elite programs and possibly the lower tiered programs, such as those from the Group of Five conferences. And this really just seeks to increase the profitability for top schools. But like we've mentioned before, it in turn pushes the smaller programs further to the margins. It would also introduce new revenue sharing models, possibly an expanded playoffs, and just a reimagined schedule to feature more of these marquee matchups.
Just from that, you naturally know I'm going to have a lot of thoughts, questions, and opinions. But before we get into some of those specifics and implications, it must also be noted that there is another proposed college football super league as well, apart from Project Rudy. So could you tell me, what is the College Student Football League?
Yes, so this is a different super league apart from Project Rudy, but the College Student Football League, or CSFL, is a proposed new structure for college football introduced by a group called College Sports Tomorrow. And their proposal aims to streamline the current football bowl subdivision, or those FBS schools, into two main conferences. So the Power 12, which would include the top 72 teams, mostly from the Power 4 or 5 conferences, and then the Group of 8, consisting of 64 teams from smaller conferences. So the goal is to create more competitive balance and allow for better revenue distribution. And some of the key aspects of the CSFL are the first one being a promotion system. So teams from the Group of 8 would have the chance to be promoted to the Power 12 based on their performance. But it's important to note that there's also no relegation mechanism in this kind of model. The second is player compensation. All football players, not just those star players, would receive compensation, and NIL and transfer rules would be negotiated collectively between the league and the player association. The third aspect is revenue distribution. Power 12 schools would receive 94% of the revenue, while the Group of 8 would get the remaining 6%. This is aimed at maintaining financial stability for the top programs while providing support for those smaller schools. And the last is the antitrust protection. The CSFL would leverage collective bargaining to avoid potential antitrust lawsuits, which are clearly a very current concern in college athletics.
I think that you, knowing me as your friend and co-host, can already imagine which league I naturally prefer and for which reasons. I'm sure we'll dive into what I'm thinking about it and what you're thinking about it. But for now, to just try and stay objective for a bit longer, what are the main differences? Let's compare the pros and cons here between Project Rudy and the CSFL. I mean, what are we looking at here?
Great question. I think breaking it down in this way, comparing the two, because at first they might seem very similar, but when you kind of pick it apart, they are pretty different. Project Rudy is an exclusive media-driven model focused on those top-tier teams, while the CSFL proposes a broader, more inclusive structure aimed at equitable competition and compensation across all the different levels of college football, which we see in this current era of those Power 4, Power 5 having more resources than the rest of the 32 whatever conferences in Division 1. There is a big divide. But within the CSFL and Project Rudy, there are 5 biggest differences. The first just being structure and scale. Project Rudy is a 70-team format, which is the most elite programs competing with one another that moves away from those smaller programs. The CSFL is splitting the 136 FBS teams into 2 conferences, the top 72 programs and then the 64 smaller programs with then promotions. The second biggest difference is the financial model. Project Rudy is backed by private equity and focuses on media rights, while the CSFL wants equitable revenue sharing with the 94% going to the Power 12 or the top 72 programs, with the 6% of revenue going to the Group of 8 or the 64 smaller programs. Third biggest difference, player compensation. Project Rudy focuses on more structure rather than players, but the CSFL aims to use collective bargaining to try and control the NIL and portal rules. The fourth, governance and antitrust protection. Like said before, Project Rudy is led by those former Disney executives and aims to create more of a private equity-driven league. The CSFL, on the other hand, is driven by university presidents and athletic administration, like the Tennessee AD, who just want to see more of a sustainable solution. And the last is competitive balance. For myself, this is where they kind of have the common ground of both just believing to have more competitive matchups and provide that opportunity for competing at the highest level week in and week out.
All right, so I understand what's attractive about both Project Rudy and the CSFL. I understand their main differences. I get this whole thing, but you look at the current college model for football specifically, they're already making a ridiculous amount of money. It's like they're in control of the collective. They're in control of the media rights. Like college football runs college athletics. So if that's already a thing, and we are seeing that there are different models that could make these schools even more money, what's stopping the current system of college athletics saying, you know what, like, let's just do this ourselves and we'll just keep the money rather than creating this sort of super league?
Yeah. Even Liam talked about it a little in last episode, but when you look at conference realignment, there was once a Power 6 with the Big East included, then the Power 5, and now a Power 4. But in reality, there is a Power 2. The ones who hold the power, the football conferences, the football teams, at the end of the day, that is the Big Ten and the SEC. The Big Ten and the SEC don't need to be in the conversations of Project Rudy or the CSFL because they can make their own league. Why would they add more teams and dilute the money pool of that revenue share when they can just do it themselves? The SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey told CBS Sports, and I quote, "Well, we are a super league, period. I've said that for years. That fact that other people have opinions that are really not subject to the extent of the evaluation that we are, that's great because maybe there's something you can learn. I'm the commissioner of the Southeastern Conference. I'm not answering hypotheticals about what if and what might happen. I deal with my reality." Any major reconstruction or restructuring of college football would have to include Greg Sankey and the Big Ten Commissioner, Tony Petitti. They control the 34 best, most attractive brands in the sport, but how do you get them to join? this proposed Super League, you're going to have to buy them out and somehow provide something different that they can't do themselves, because I believe college football is still being undermarketed and undervalued. Last week, like this podcast has had to go through, of it changes every day. Last week, the two powerhouse commissioners met in Tennessee as an alliance, and the Big Ten commissioner even said this meeting entailed, and I quote, "It's basically to schedule more good games and reorganize the way you play those games, like in terms of just tiering or going across and redoing divisions. Some say conferences can survive. Some say you don't need conferences. At the end of the day, I think there's a strong commitment that we have the ability to do all of this ourselves." So with that, and with knowing that the SEC and Big Ten alliance is strong and it's prevalent and it is a reality, I think the biggest test will be this year's college football playoff, or CFP, expanded 12-team playoff. If the CFP committee doesn't pick the teams the SEC or Big Ten believes garner the best competition or best media opportunity at the end of the day, that is the perfect opportunity for these Power 2 conferences to break off and do it themselves.
I mean, we've talked about this previously ever since week 1 of this college football season. We saw it with the Vegas game, right? Which was a humongous deal. Is that what we're talking about here with like these non-conference matchups and just making college football even more exciting? Is this what these two commissioners are looking at moving forward?
Definitely. The Big Ten and SEC are eyeing that scheduling agreement to increase the media revenue, and Sports Business Journal states it's an answer to billions in lost revenue from the House legal case settlement. So, like you said, we've seen the Big Ten SEC football matchup already 3 times this season. That week 1 USC LSU game in Vegas. We've seen it Alabama at Wisconsin, and also Michigan, Texas, all of which were among the top 10 overall viewership in the first month of the season reported. If the SEC and Big Ten look to schedule maybe 12 to 16 of these non-con regular season matchups, the viewership will be there 100%. There is a level of competition that is so exciting that separates them from the rest. The Washington football head coach commented on that Big Ten matchup of just Oregon and Ohio State, saying that was a battle of two $20 million rosters. And no doubt, a SEC versus Big Ten non-con game would be the exact same. There still needs to be conversation of what teams would go up against one another and what the revenue distribution would look like, but it's clear the discussions are pointing to the scheduling agreement, and I'm interested to see if it happens, when it happens, and what those numbers would look like in practice.
Before we shift gears and head to the latter side of this episode, what do you make of this? Like you're looking at the possibility of there being 2 different types of super leagues, not simultaneously, but there's 2 options there. There's the option of the Power 2 just saying, screw off, like I'm going to do my own thing because I already do it. What do you think is the most realistic option?
I think the Big Ten and SEC splitting off and doing their own thing is plausible, considering that this alliance has been going on and there's like advisory groups and they meet regularly, and it's apparent that there are numbers that support this theory that it is a Power 2 and it is what is driving the change. Like even right now, the Big Ten and SEC want more automatic bids to the CFP playoff. They want their teams, all of them, to be in there because they believe that their schedule is the hardest. They believe they are the best football teams in the NCAA, which is arguably true. So why should they not get the most money in the pot? And I think that's where it gets tricky, is the Big 12, the ACC, and what was the Pac-12. They thought they were up to that level. They're not. I think it's a little sad just because in terms of the Pac-12, you're seeing those old Pac-12 teams they did so well last season. Washington making it all the way to the Natty, and the Pac-12 had great football teams. They were competitive. Oregon right now ranked number 2, and it's sad to see that it wasn't able to be preserved in terms of the Pac-12. And you're seeing those top football teams. Where are they now? They're in the Big Ten. This wasn't conference realignment at the end of the day, no matter what people say of, oh, they're the best at academics and athletics. That's just not true. You are looking at football. And who did the Big Ten snag from the Pac-12? USC, UCLA, not to say UCLA is a football school right now, but USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington. Those were the top, arguably, football schools of the Pac-12. Football is driving everything. And if you're looking at what's happened in the past, if football drives everything, why wouldn't the Big Ten and SEC do their own thing?
I mean, and even in a world where there is the power to, and they just decide to do their own thing, because even to me, it sounds like they don't necessarily have to split off. They just have to add more non-conference games. Mm-hmm. Like if it's just conference and non-conference games between, I mean, obviously, so their conferences are their own thing, but all non-conference, they just stick to these 2 conferences and create their own little clique, if you will, like within the NCAA or whatever the FBS. I think that'd be interesting because you're not really changing anything. You're just you're just making more money. And realistically, yeah, I mean, we'll see. It'll be interesting to see how this new playoff format works for the 12 teams because, yeah, most likely most of these teams will be coming from those 2 conferences. But I don't see why they would need to split off.
Yeah, I think you make a great point right there of the non-conference games in general. I think they tried it out a bit this year with those 3 games that I mentioned, but I think they, like, even coaches right now and probably conferences don't know how the expanded playoff is going to play out. Because before, to make it into that 14 playoff, you could not lose a game, non-con or conference games. But when you're in a conference like the Big Ten, and you have those top matchups every single year, and let's say Michigan has a loss and Ohio State has a loss, and the CFP committee is looking at both of those, who's going to come in, and both of them, let's say, have a loss, you look at non-con schedules. But this year, with the expanded playoff, you are most likely going to have teams with at least 1 loss. So do you save that maybe 1 loss for your conference matchups, like the Big Ten, who is a powerhouse in football, and you have easy non-con games? Because those non-con games probably aren't going to be the ones that resume boost you into the playoff. It's going to be your conference record. So do you give your guys a little break and have those easy matchup, easy wins on those first couple of weeks of football? Or do you stack your resume? We don't know yet because we haven't seen how this expanded playoff works. So I think that will be very telling of what happens next for the Big Ten and SEC in terms of that scheduling agreement.
Again, we need to wait for this to happen to fully understand what it actually looks like. With that being said, it's only logical, right? Because you want to win because it's a competition, and I'm sure there's some sort of prize money involved as well, and everybody's happy because of the money. But if you can guarantee money without having to win a national title, and you guarantee money for multiple schools within your own conference, isn't it only logical to then schedule more of these games? And as you start scheduling only hard games, obviously the schedule will obviously just be way harder than everybody else's, which plays a role and stuff. But even then, you look at these teams, they're not going to be losing more than maybe 2 games in the season when it comes to, if you have a LSU USC, that's understand. One of them has to lose the game, right? Mm-hmm. That's just naturally how it works. So it'll probably expand to being able to have more than 1 loss. But to me, if I'm thinking about it, you already see how much money is being brought in by a single one of those games. What if you make every team in your conference play against the other conference the first 3 games? that would be a ridiculous amount of money. And that money is then reinvested into winning. And it's just like, it levels everything up. I don't know. I think that's a very logical thing to do without having to create this super league, without having to split off. If that happens, great. But I think they could just create their own clique.
Yeah, I agree. Do you think from a fan perspective, if you have those big matchups week in and week out, do you think there will be like fan fatigue of those top matchups?
No. And the reason I say no is because when you look at a model like the Champions League, just to bring it back to soccer, the Champions League is literally the best teams from the European leagues in soccer. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because the way the model works is if your league is more difficult, you're allowed to have more of your teams go into the Champions League. So like if you're in a smaller country, I guess we could look at, I don't know, let's say the Netherlands, right? So if the Netherlands league is not as competitive as Spain's or Italy's or England's, so they can only send one team and maybe a second team can qualify, whereas in England and in Spain, 4 teams already go through. So you're making sure that these teams are always competing with the highest level teams. And it's so much fun. Like, it's so much fun because these are teams that you don't see competing against each other. They're not from the same region. And that's what makes it so much fun. Whereas in your own league, you'll have like the first place against the 20th place, and sure, fun if there's an upset. That's super exciting. But when it's the Champions League, everybody's like, oh, it's a Champions League night. And I think the more that could happen, especially at the beginning of the season, the better, because then you have 3 games that are these spotlight non-conference big matchups that you're just not used to. Then you have your traditional conference games. And then at the end, you have playoffs or the bowl game, whatever it may be. So that's an exciting beginning, a middle that's already secured. Like, it will be exciting because of rivalries, and then the cherry on top at the end. Who wouldn't want to watch that, right? Especially in a season that's so short. Soccer is a year long. This is like, what, 4 months?
Yep.
Why wouldn't you? That'd be so fun. Versus like, Alabama winning 63-0 or 63-3, whatever it was. Yeah. Like, I think it'd be super interesting. Now the question becomes, does the Super League then make sense for the other 2 conferences? Like, because naturally it'll benefit them way more, but should they create their own clique? And it'll be like the second tier. And bringing it back to soccer, there's the Champions League, and then there's the Europa League, which is like the second best of the best. And people still watch it. It's not as popular, but people still watch it. So maybe it makes more sense for these other ACC included. You can add some others, but
100% if the Big Ten, or not if, when the Big Ten and SEC do their football scheduling agreement, the ACC and Big 12 have to do theirs. They have to. Because we're seeing it in men's basketball and women's basketball this upcoming season. The ACC and SEC are doing a little tournament. Like, Cal is competing against Auburn, I believe. And you're going to see it. Big 10 and Big 12 are doing it as well. So you're seeing scheduling agreements happen. And I think that's a great point that I didn't mention is you're right, that those other conferences have to do one themselves, because those matchups that you've never seen before. And I think that's why, like, yes, Oregon, Ohio State this past weekend was a 2-3 matchup, but also it's a matchup that we have not seen in so long, if not ever, in just this modern day era of college athletics. So yes, technically it's a conference matchup. It's a Big Ten conference matchup, but it's also 2 teams that just don't usually go up against each other. And the level of competition there was incredible. 32-31 went all the way down to the last second. It was an incredible game. I was at a concert and I was still trying to watch it. Like, it was such a great game that I didn't want to miss. I was somewhere else and I didn't want to miss it. And when you have more matchups like that, you're going to get the viewership, you're going to bring in the money. And it's just, that's the level of excitement that could happen with a Big Ten SEC scheduling agreement.
I mean, it's just because realistically, you're shrinking your season by having these lesser games, if you will, where it's like a secure blowout. You're expanding it by 3 games. I don't know. It just makes a lot of sense to me. Maybe the gotcha moment is for the ACC, for the Big 12. Maybe the gotcha moment is when it flips to men's basketball. Maybe that's what could be interesting about Project Rudy or the CSFL, where they're like, wait, maybe we're not there when it comes to football, but hey, do you want to organize something like this when it comes to Duke and North Carolina? Do you want to come join us, or are we going to exclude you when it comes to this? Because listen, we could do that for football, but hey, we're going to exclude you when it comes to men's basketball. Maybe that's the negotiation that takes place. Maybe that's the gotcha moment, but plenty to think about. We'll have to revisit this when CFP playoffs do take place. I think that'll be very, very interesting. And I'm just gonna put it out there. Would be fascinating to chat with any of these conference commissioners at any point. Just gonna put it out there. Maybe clip this whenever it does happen, but would be very interesting to get their perspective.
Or a committee member of the CFP.
We'll see. But for now, shifting gears a little bit from this Super League discussion, let's talk a bit more like things going on within the NCAA. There's shocker. There's more news in the NCAA. This time they are eliminating the National Letter of Intent, better known as NLI, not NIL, NLI. What's going on with this? Like, again, just obviously you and I know what this is. Everybody that's ever committed to be a student athlete knows what the National Letter of Intent is, but could you explain what it is and why this decision is taking place?
So I wish I could tell you why or how this decision came about, but there was a D1 in-person, like D1 SAC in-person meeting. I was not there. I asked some friends who were there and it was not discussed. So I wish I could tell you how or the discussions around this, but I can't. But I can tell you that now, instead of signing that NLI, the PSAs will be signing financial agreements. So the original purpose of the NLI was to have a binding agreement that required student athletes to commit to a school for one academic year in exchange for athletic scholarships. But I think it's also important to note that this was a voluntary process. But now with NLI being eliminated, written offers of athletics aid will replace this NLI program. So with PSAs signing financial aid agreements and soon to be revenue share agreements, there are concerns that the PSAs will see the paper and the number in front of them and then flip commitments on the spot. For myself, I think this actually may be helpful and help settle the chaos because it's going to expose institutions and what they are giving a PSA up front. It's going to show which program is being truthful and who was bluffing. If it is signing day and that paper is in front of you and that number is not matching up, you don't have to sign it. And I think that will happen because that's just kind of the era we're in of people trying to scam these 18-year-olds, these people in the transfer, whatever that may be, to come to that school. So I'm hoping that's what the NCAA is also thinking, is having verbatim the contracts like we've talked about in front of them, read it out, know what you are getting yourself into. I'm hoping that will help settle the chaos that is happening.
Surely this is what the NCAA is thinking, because it looks like they're taking a very protective stance. Obviously, there's plenty of stuff going on the collective side. We saw it recently with the former QB1 for UNLV on how probably this isn't out there, but probably just didn't sign a contract and was promised one thing verbally that didn't end up happening. I personally know stories of people that are in non-revenue sports that signed their NLI, but then didn't go through, didn't even end up going to that school, had to not even decommit, but the offer was pulled. Like it creates an entire mess. So I think that's a protective stance for sure, but also on the protective stance, I think the NCAA actually ended up doubling down because they reduced the days for the transfer portal. They're shrinking the transfer portal windows specifically for basketball and football from the original 45 days to 30. So do you think this is just them saying, you know what, like, first off, we don't want you guys to get screwed over. And because when you do get screwed over, you go into the transfer portal. With that being said, since you are protected up front, we are now going to reduce your options to maybe just keep you at your school and not create this chaos. Is that what they're saying?
Well, the portal in terms of those days have been talked about for probably like a year and a half now. D1 SAC, every single meeting, we talk about the transfer portal in these days. So from my understanding and from an NCAA perspective, they think it will eliminate the tampering that occurs in the portal of poaching players to jump in the portal or offering deals in that pay-for-play manner. It's trying to just create stability for the portal of shifting from 45 to 30 days. I'm unsure if it will. I don't know if shortening the window is the solution. I think it's confusing because you don't have to commit within the transfer window, if anyone doesn't know that. You just have to have your name in the portal. I did not know that for the longest time. So you don't have to commit in 30 days. You just have to like jump in there and put your name in there within the 30 days. And the NCAA has data that shows that most people enter their name in the portal at the beginning and at the end of the window. Not much of an influx in the middle period. So that's why I don't see shortening the windows making a difference. We've had this discussion, like I said, in D1 SAC so many times of, yes, the amount of time for the window, but also when the windows open. Starting from the 24-25 academic year, NCAA basketball transfer windows will last 30 days, opening the day after the second round of each D1 championship. The NCAA announced that for men's basketball, the window runs from March 24th to April 22nd, and for women's basketball from March 25th to April 23rd. In football, the 30-day transfer window will be split into two periods, December 9th to 28th and April 16th through 25th. For myself, and I've had these conversations before, and I've expressed my concern, I don't think it's fair for the teams who make the playoff, those postseason playoffs. If your team makes the NCAA tournament, no matter what sport, and you are a role player on your team, you most likely aren't going to jump in the portal when it opens. Because if you do, there is no shot you are going to continue playing for your team in the tournament. No shot your coaches let you rep that jersey, that institution anymore. There's just no way. And the arguments for these windows of when they open are, one, the roster management in terms of the timeline for recruitment for coaches. Two, the teams who make the tournaments don't need the extra help or time, etc., for recruiting. And three, academic timelines of the school year. But from experience and discussions in these rooms, I think it's unfair to ask of coaches who have teams in the postseason tournament to not only coach your team to a national championship, but also recruit out of the portal. Teams in the tournament should not be punished for making it that far, and they are, because you are disadvantaged when it comes to the portal. In my mind, your coach and teammates should have 100% focus on the national championship, not bringing transfers to campus visits or deciding whether or not to wait to jump in the portal while your competition already has. I think the window shortening, I honestly, I don't think it's going to make a difference. I think the windows of when it opens, that is what needs to be changed.
Yeah, that's kind of messed up. And I guess the one argument I potentially understand is the academic timelines. Yeah. But even then, like, I mean, it's a responsible stance, but come on, like, you're telling me you can't be looking at both of these things at the same time. Like, that's kind of how it works, unless you want to open it up in the summer. But listen, I mean, I think it's an entire mess just because from my personal experience, and I know this through former teammates, once you enter the transfer portal, you give up your spot on the team.
Scholarship gets taken.
Yeah. And you're off the team. Like, you're not going to practice. It depends on every program, right? But technically, you are off the team. By jumping into the transfer portal, and this is what's so tricky, you are saying, here's my jersey, here's my scholarship, here's my commitment to your program. I'm looking elsewhere. And if I don't find anything elsewhere, I'm done. That's the truth. That's from my experience. That's what I've seen that actually happens. Why would you do that when you are in the midst of March Madness? Why on earth would you give up a spot on a team that is right there? It makes no sense.
And people say, like, that's why we can open the portal early, because these student athletes who make the tournament, blah, 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 are not going to transfer. That's not true. Because also those teams who make it to the whatever, they look at the portal. That's this new age of college athletics. People look to the portal to see who they recruit. I really just don't like how coaches have to now take away their time, their energy, their focus from winning a national championship with the team they have, because time's already ticking, and people are already looking to the portal. You have to also, or you are losing out on these portal recruits. And that's what I don't like. And there's a fallacy that top programs don't need that extra time to recruit. That is not true. That is so not true, because like we've talked about so many times, even within the top, there are the cream of the crop, and there are ones who are still trying to climb and still trying to survive in this new era of college athletics. So I think those windows need to change.
I think it's definitely wrong. Now, with that being said, are we going to be here and just be naive and say they're only using that window of time to look at prospects, to look at potential transfers? Well, I mean, the rules say one thing, reality says another. I don't think it'll be as big as an issue as we are making of it, because the top of the top, I mean, first off, they'll hire someone or just assign someone to be looking at these things. And they're not going to limit themselves to 15 days twice a year or 30 days a year to just say, oh, this is when I'm actually going to maybe look at my potential. No. I mean, it's a small world. Everybody talks. Everybody knows if you want to transfer, you play someone, and after the game, oh, we'll chat later in the season. And it's like, yeah, I mean, we can't be naive and just say like, oh, it's going to be so difficult for them. Is it ideal? Definitely not. With that being said, if that's the NCAA rule, I can already see all these top programs either bending the rules or just making it work for them. So that's just how it works. All right, let's wrap this up. What do you have on conference realignment and this messy situation that we have here?
The Mountain West has officially announced Hawaii to be added as a full member in 2026. With the move, UH will no longer pay travel subsidies to the Mountain West in football, and will leave behind travel subsidies it paid to Big West schools in most other team sports. So the Mountain West is slowly building. We'll see what else happens there, but that's the big update in terms of conference realignment.
Awesome. Well, we'll wrap it up there. That is it for today. If you're on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you're on Spotify, please follow the podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. This has been episode 17, and we're about to hop on a call with our guest for episode 18. Closing in on that 1% mark for 21 episodes. So very exciting. Thank you to everybody that's been reaching out. And yeah, like, subscribe, comment, share, and we'll see you all next Monday.
Bye.